episode of Preferred Walk-On, PFF's college football show. I'm your host, Max Chadwick, alongside my co-host, Dalton Wasserman, with our Week 8 previewing the 5 biggest games of the weekend. And Dalton, I got to let you know this one thing. In the last 4 hours before we started recording the show, I have been doing extensive research because this is the 5th straight weekend with at least 4 games between ranked teams. That hasn't happened since the 2012 season. 5 straight weekends of 4 ranked games. I went through every single year. It was very meticulous. I honestly didn't think I was going to get it done in time. I got it done like 10 minutes ago. Finally finding the last time this has happened where there's 5 straight weekends of 4 ranked games, man. That just shows you we are in college football heaven right now, Dalton, and we have some massive games that we're talking about today.
Oh, certainly. There's big games every week. And with all the parity that's come in this year, it does not feel like, even with Georgia trying to three-peat, it does not feel like we have just 1, 2, 3 teams in this race. There are probably legitimately 12 to 15 teams who are still playoff candidates if they run the table from here on in. And there's huge games every week now, top 10 matchups, in-conference matchups, rivalries, big names, you name it. I mean, we're getting everything every week right now, and I don't know if it's unprecedented, but I mean, within the last decade it is. And when you've got matchups this big with this big of playoff implications every single week, it gets to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, 5 straight weekends of 4 ranked games. That hasn't happened in 11 years, man. So enjoy it right now, because I'm looking ahead to next week. I don't think we're going to get 4 ranked games again next week, but we're going to enjoy this week as we can. And this is the biggest game, Dalton, that we're talking about first. Number 7 Penn State at number 3 Ohio State, 12 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. I'm actually going to be in attendance in the press box. Shout out Dave Sofaro for getting me a credential. There's a very strict rule that you cannot cheer in the press box, so me as a diehard Penn State fan is going to be internally screaming the entire game. But Dalton, the big storyline obviously is, can my Nittany Lions, can they finally get over the hump, man? Because right now, they're in the shadow of Ohio State and Michigan. In each of the last 6 seasons, either Ohio State or Michigan has won the Big Ten Conference, with Penn State kind of being the little brother to those two. And Penn State last year, 11-2, they won the Rose Bowl, only 2 losses were Ohio State and Michigan. So now, all of a sudden, and Ohio State right now has beaten Penn State in 6 straight games. That is the longest streak in this series history, is 6 straight Ohio State's taken down Penn State. Now, all of a sudden, Penn State, a lot of Penn State fans think, hey, this is the year. This is the year for them to finally get over the hump, win the Big Ten, make the college football playoff. And we'll see, man. They have to get over Ohio State and Michigan first, though, if they want to do that. What is the matchup that you want to see in this game to see if Penn State can go from a New Year's 6 team to a college football playoff team?
This is a weird one, because I think a theme for me in these games that we're doing is teams that have been through adversity and either come out of it or they need to rebound from it, right? Like you take Ohio State and you go, okay, now they have Kyle McCord and they're trying to work him in and still win games, and the Notre Dame game was a war that they got through. Or you look at USC coming off a big loss, or Oregon coming off a big loss, or Alabama with their quarterback problems, right? Penn State's the one team we're going to talk about today that really hasn't been through any adversity, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you look at the offensive grades of their opponents, okay? They're 98th, 125th, 120th, 89th, and West Virginia was 42nd, but if I take out a blowout against Duquesne, who's not a particularly good FCS team, that drops to 85th. So you could argue Penn State has not played a top 80 offense in the country. Then the defenses, right? They played Iowa, who's 3rd in the grading, yet they haven't played another team in the top 80 in defense. So Penn State 7-0 is always earned, but it's just suddenly the moment for them, right? They're not particularly efficient offensively, right? If I take out last week's just practice game against UMass, their offensive line is still grading like 62nd in the country. We've talked about this for several weeks against Illinois, or when they played Iowa, that their offensive line outside of Fashanu is kind of an issue. And this Ohio State matchup is not one that, it's arguably, if it's not the best front 7 in the country, it's probably in the top 5. Tui Moloau,
definitely,
Sawyer, Eichenberg, Chamber, all these guys, Williams. Ohio State has a boatload of guys you need to block. And Penn State, just hasn't been through the adversity up front to really like kind of iron sharpens iron sort of thing and get better up front, and we saw them against Illinois struggle for about 3/4 of that game with Johnny Newton and those guys. And even against Iowa, you have an offense that they ran 97 plays against Iowa, right? They had the ball for over 45 minutes, which I don't know the last time I've seen that. And they still only came out, even though it was close to 400 yards of total offense, it was only like 4 yards a play flat. It's just not an efficient offense. Their receiving cores dropped 15 balls. Drew Aller I like Drew Aller a lot. He keeps the ball out of harm's way, and he plays the way that he needs to play for them to win these games. But he's only got 3 big-time throws on the season, which I believe is the second most with someone with as many dropbacks, around 195 dropbacks as him, second least in the country. This is a hard one for me with Penn State's offense because I haven't seen a ton of explosive and really even a ton of efficient for them. And when you think about Ohio State kind of playing the same style of ball, defense first, game manager at quarterback, but they have more explosive playmakers. You've got Harrison, you've got Ibuka. If Ibuka plays, if Travion Henderson plays, even Henderson popped off for the 60-yard touchdown against Notre Dame. They have guys who can do it, right? I'm not entirely sure that Penn State, this is as big a step up as it gets. Now, they played Iowa's defense. That's the only comparable that I have for it. And they had the ball a ton, and Aller had 4 touchdowns, all under 10 yards. But they weren't efficient. We've just seen continuous cracks in this offense despite easy competition. And I'm not sure this is the week where they suddenly start scoring a bunch of points.
Yeah, you mentioned that too, man. I mean, the run game for Penn State, which is supposed to be one of the best parts of this team, has not been able to do anything because, like you mentioned, the offensive line is not really blocking well either. And still, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen are not creating too much for themselves either. So the run, it really is all on Drew Aller's shoulders, basically, this offense. I wanted to go to the defensive side of the ball. You mentioned it a little bit of my biggest matchup is, okay, just how legit is this Penn State defense, man? Right now, they're leading the country in EPA per play by a mile, basically. They're only allowing 8.2 points per game, which is right behind Michigan for the best in the country. But like you mentioned, it's important to contextualize those stats with the offenses they played. In terms of EPA per play, West Virginia is 62nd in the country. Delaware, FCS school. Illinois, 105th in the country. Iowa, 133rd. There's 133 FBS teams, by the way. Iowa, dead last in EPA per play. Northwestern, 101st. UMass, 110th. So of all those offenses, Delaware is an FCS school, and 4 of the other 5 games have come against teams outside of the top 100 in EPA per play. Penn State has played maybe the easiest schedule in terms of offensive teams of any team so far this season, man. It has been super easy. And by comparison, Ohio State is not as explosive as they were in years past, but they're still 13th in the country in EPA per play. This is still a top 15 offense that Penn State is going against. But the one thing I will say that I think Penn State can do well defensively in this game is that Kyle McCord is kind of a statue in the pocket. He's not very good under pressure. Right now, he has a 33.8 grade under pressure, 7th worst among Power 5 quarterbacks. Penn State, meanwhile, leads the country in pass rush win rate and pressure rate this season. Chop Robinson, who we've interviewed, if you want to check out that interview, he is one of the top edge defenders in the NFL draft, one of the top edge defenders in college football, and he could have a very good game against an okay Ohio State offensive line. And if they get pressure on Kyle McCord, I don't care how good those receivers are, man. It could be a long day for the Ohio State offense. But ultimately, Dalton, who are you rolling with in this top 10 showdown?
I think you make a great point about the pass rush and Robinson and McCord, because that's really, to me, the one way Penn State can win this game. If they can get pressure up front with 4 and they can hold up reasonably well, I think they're still leading the country in passer rating allowed. I mean, it all blends together, right? Marrying the pass rush with the coverage. That's the one way they can keep themselves in and stay in this game. Because for as much as I want to say that the way to win this game is for Aller to be superhuman, I just don't think he has the surrounding, the supporting cast to be able to do that. I think he's got the talent. I think on certain teams he would be that guy. Yeah. But the way this team is choosing to play And the way that, I mean, it's a very average offensive line. It's a very average receiving core. And the backs just aren't able, when everybody knows you're going to run the ball, it's really hard to run the ball, right? McCord, I really like what I see from McCord. I've told you before, I think he's one of the most fun tape watches in the country right now. It's not because he's like big and flashy like Shador or Jaden Daniels or one of those things. You're just seeing modest like improvement every week. The Notre Dame game, he got through it. He made a couple of big throws when he needed to. The last couple of weeks, they had some adversity against Maryland. Look, honestly, Maryland even is better than any team that Penn State has played so far.
Yeah,
and they were behind early in that game and overcame it. And Kyle McCord he's really kind of mastering the complementary football thing right now. I really like what's going on. The two things that can hurt Ohio State in this game are Penn State's pass rush, like you mentioned. And if Henderson and or Ibuka aren't playing, the one thing McCord does need is the full complement, right? Mm-hmm. Harrison's great, Ibuka's great, Cade Stover's great, Travion Henderson. Fully loaded, I think even with McCord, Ohio State's as good as anybody, right? Injuries could be a problem here, but I think Ohio State, these two teams play a very similar style of football, and I think Ohio State's better at it. Penn State, I don't know what to make of Penn State until this game is over, because they just haven't played anybody. It's I know Ohio State against, it's not a ton, but at Notre Dame, Maryland, they really beat up Purdue last week, and Purdue's not horrible. I just know more about Ohio State, I feel like, than Penn State. They play similar styles of ball. It's in Columbus, and I'm just not seeing enough from Penn State's offense to think they could go for more than maybe 17 points in this game. I'm going to go Ohio State 21, Penn State 13.
Okay. That's fair. I actually I don't feel good about this, but I feel like I have to ride the Nittany Lions, man. I'm going Penn State 24, Ohio State 21. I'm being a little homer here. I'm not going to lie to you guys. But I do think the pass rush for Penn State could be a big part of this game. And I think that could be ultimately what leads this team to victory. And I think, this is the first time I got to go back, maybe Kerry Collins for Penn State in the 90s. This is the first time I can remember Penn State having the better quarterback going into the Ohio State game, which I think also could matter. Now, of course, the complement of weapons and the offensive structure around him, way better in Columbus than it is in Happy Valley. But I do think Drew Aller, this could be a statement game for him and say, hey, I'm the number one overall pick in 2025. Like, I'm going to be the guy next year. So I got Penn State in this one, man. I think they'll get out of Ohio State's shadow, establish itself as a legitimate college football playoff contender. But I will not lie to you guys, I don't feel good about it. I think this is a game that I could see going either way, man. And if you're a betting man, I would avoid this game because I truly do not know where it's going to go. And why this is going to be the biggest game of the weekend is we just don't know in this game. It's going to be a great game, and I can't wait for it. Another great game, though, Dalton, at 3:30 on CBS is number 17 Tennessee at number 11 Alabama. Last year, it was an instant classic, man. 6th-ranked Tennessee beat number 3 Alabama 52-49. It was an absolute shootout. Jalen Hyde, I think, had 5 touchdown catches in that game. Hendon Hooker was unreal. It was the first loss of the season. It was Nick Saban's first ever loss to Tennessee as Alabama's head coach. Now, Alabama needs to beat Tennessee and avenge that loss if they want any chance of making the college football playoff. And Tennessee wants to establish itself as, the biggest threat to Georgia in the SEC East division. But ultimately, Dalton, what is the matchup that you're really looking forward to in this game?
This is a fun one. I almost forgot about last year's game, as memorable as it was, because you've got this game is going to look nothing at all like last year.
Yep, that's what I was going to
say too. This is not Bryce Young and Hendon Hooker. It's actually scary how similar these two teams are. Okay, let me give you some. Since week 4, all right, 4 games, 4 weeks, I should say. I think Tennessee had a bye week. These two teams are number 1 and 2. Tennessee 1 and Alabama 2 in defensive grade since week 4.
Wow.
Over the last 4 weeks, these are the 2 best defenses in the country. Here's the difference, okay? Alabama is number 11 in offensive grade, right? Because week 3 was a real inflection point for both. Tennessee lost to Florida, and Bama had the whole ordeal at USF, okay? Since week 4, they put Milroe back in there. They're the 11th highest graded offense in the country. The problem is Tennessee is 78th. Joe Milton, over the last 3 games, has a 50.4 passing grade and 2 big-time throws and 6 turnover-worthy plays. They don't, I talked about this after the Florida game. They don't schematically do a whole lot. They run down the pipe, they throw screens on the outside, and Milton throws it as far as he can. And you're just starting to see teams adjust to where if you don't give up that big play over the top, there's not really a whole lot of answers. They don't make any real throws underneath under 20 yards, to be honest. They just don't make enough moving the chain type of throws. Now, you got a lot of similar elements on this team. Okay. James Pierce Jr., second in the country in pass rush grade. Spectacular. Dallas Turner for Alabama leads the country in pressures. Kamal Hadden for Tennessee, second in the country with over a 90 coverage grade, right? We've been over Alabama's secondary with McKinstry and Arnold and Downs and Key and everything they have. I think they're the best secondary in the country.
Yep.
Where this game, I think, will be won is on the ground. You have to avoid all of that with both of these teams. You don't want to be dropping back and having Turner or Pierce rushing the passer. You don't want to throw deep into these secondaries. I think the team with more rushing yards wins this game. You've got Jalen Wright, who's really, really good, 7.1 yards per carry. And Tennessee, it's a whole different mentality than last year. Last year, you had Hooker and those receivers, Hyatt, Tillman, gunning the ball down the field. They line up and they run power for the most part, pulling guards, getting right downhill at you. And Jalen Wright is the first down machine, no question. And to be honest with you, I'd like to see them get Joe Milton more involved in there. He's at 8.8 yards a carry himself. They just don't run him enough. He's got, I think it's 219 yards on 19 carries or 20 carries. Somewhere in there, if you include the scrambles, it's very few carries and a lot of yards. There is the point. They really don't use him a whole lot, even though he's a really good athlete. And Alabama's kind of the same way, where they've figured out, we've talked about, they have a bigger offensive line than any NFL team, right? They've decided they just line up 2 tight ends on the field, and they just put you on the sled over and over and over. And McClellan and Roydell Williams are both really good at finding the holes through that. It's kind of almost like that. I can compare it to how the Steelers kind of ran things when they had Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah.
Just line up.
Yep.
Double teams. And let the back find the hole. And it's exactly what Bama's doing. And off of that, you still have Milroe as a massive threat. And Milroe, have we ever seen a matchup with 2 quarterbacks with stronger arms than these 2 guys?
Dude, I don't think we have, man. I don't think we have.
I mean, you've got guys who now Bama's starting to hit their shots 2 or 3 times a game, which is big, but it's all set up by the run game for both of these teams. So I think the team with more rushing yards wins this game, and because McClellan's he's got it, man. He's like one of those blue collar workhorse backs who just, it feels like, and even on the the rare occasion when they're missing blocks in these duo kind of schemes, he's really good at making guys miss in the backfield, making that one cut just to make something happen, make 5 yards out of nothing. I mean, we've been over Bama's offense a lot, and you have to. These are both teams. I think you have to put in obvious passing situations. Whoever runs for more and gets the lead first is going to have a huge advantage in this game.
Absolutely, Matt. I think that's a great breakdown you made, and yes, it is going to really come down to the run game. And listen, like we mentioned, if you are hoping for another shootout like last year, prepare to be disappointed, man, because this is not at all the same as last year. Bryce Young and Hendon Hooker aren't walking through that door anytime soon. Now, Joe Milton has filled in admirably, Jalen Moreau has filled in admirably for Bryce Young, but he's still not Bryce Young. He's still not the number 1 overall pick. Right now, Jalen Moreau has a 79.2 passing grade. Young in his career had a 92.9 passing grade. Joe Milton has not filled in Hendon Hooker's shoes at all. They look like probably clown shoes on his feet right now, because he is 106th in the country with a 62.2 passing grade. He has as many turnover-worthy plays as big-time throws this season. We were all very excited for Joe Milton. In this vertical-based scheme, he has by far the strongest arm in college football. He's even said it himself, he could throw 90-plus yards if he wants to. So we were thinking about, oh my God, with how many deep vertical throws they threw last year, imagine that with the strongest arm in the country, and it looked great in the Orange Bowl against Clemson when Hendon Hooker didn't play in it. It hasn't looked like that this year. And Joe Milton has really, really struggled. And then like you mentioned, man, the defensive backfields for both of these teams are fantastic. I would make the argument Kamal Hadden might be the best corner in America right now. He is playing unreal football. We didn't talk about him in our midseason All-American team or our midseason awards, but he has really been incredible this season. He actually was a guy that Tennessee fans even let me know on Twitter. They were booing him sometimes because he struggled early in his career, and they were booing him and wanting him off the field. Now, he's the best corner in college football, in my opinion, right now. So he has been unreal. There are 5 DBs in this game who have 80-plus grades so far this season, with Kamal Haddon, Wesley Walker, Tennessee's other safety, Alabama safety Caleb Downs, and, of course, Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry. And I'm glad you brought up real quick, I want to talk about this guy. Dallas Turner's going to be a top 10 pick. He leads the country in pressure, like you said. The one guy who I tweeted about this past week, and Tennessee fans love that people are finally talking about him, James Pierce Jr., dude. This guy, I think he could be a top 5 pick in 2025, man. He is crazy. He leads the FBS in pressure rate. He also is 3rd in pass rush win rate. His speed to power, Dalton, is ridiculous. We just to kind of spoil some of our plans for after the season is over, we are planning on doing an NFL mock draft, but everybody in college football is eligible, not just the guys who are actually in the draft. I think there's a chance, dude, that James Pierce Jr. is our number 1 edge defender in that all-eligible mock draft. What do you think about that?
It's entirely possible. You talk about a freak athlete getting everything done on the edge. He's one of those prototypes, man. I mean, we talk about these other guys like Latu and Verse, and there's a handful of guys who are the prototype. He's in that group for sure. He's really the missing piece from their defense last year. You know, last year they weren't particularly great up front, and this guy's emergence, man. He could cause a major problem in this game. I mean, Milroe wants to stand back there and hold the ball forever, and Pierce may just not let him. If he gets in Milroe's lap early in this game, it could cause Alabama a lot of problems.
Absolutely. And listen, we put out our midseason awards, but I also put out my midseason awards with finalists for each of them. Dallas Turner and James Pierce Jr. were finalists for the Bednarik Award and Nagurski Trophy, which is the best defensive player in college football. So I consider those two of the 3 best defensive players in college football. So Jalen Monroe and Joe Milton are going to be under pressure probably a lot in this game because Tennessee's offensive line has not really played that well, and Alabama's has had struggles this season as well. So ultimately, Dalton, though, who are you rolling with? And will it be as high scoring as last year, or are we in for a pretty low scoring game?
I just find this funny, these first 2 games, we talk about how similar these teams are. And this one especially, when I started digging into it, just scary similar. They're like the same exact team, honestly. I think you got a couple factors working in Bama's favor. I do think they have a quarterback advantage. Milroe, since getting put back in the starting lineup, has been very good. He's done everything they've needed him to do. They don't ask him to do too much, like certain quarterbacks in the country, but he's done everything they've asked of him. I just think of, you've got these 2 teams, defense, run the ball, take your shots, mobile-ish quarterback, especially on Bama's side. I think Bama's just the better version of it, and the game's in Tuscaloosa. Joe Milton, I think the one thing Tennessee should do in this game if they want a shot is run Joe Milton more than they have been. Bama's yet to allow a 100-yard rusher this season, and most of the best performances against them are quarterbacks. Actually, I believe the best one was Byron Brown from USF. He had the best rushing performance out of anybody. Bama's just lethal in run defense. I mean, it's the same thing we talked about Kirby Smart in Georgia last week. They don't give up any yards to backs. Neither did Alabama. I mean, that's where it came from, right? They don't give up any yards to running backs. And if you're one-dimensional against Alabama, you're going to lose. Tennessee has to, I don't know if it's going to come from pure luck or just making plays on the outside with the screen game or what, but there's not much in Tennessee's passing game right now that makes me feel like they're a huge threat to Bama. They're going to have to play spectacular in the front 7. Pierce has to get after Milroe before he breaks the pocket. And they need to force some turnovers or something has to happen in their front 7 for them to stay in this game, because if they're one-dimensional on offense, it could get not like blowout super like 49-10 ugly, but like ugly in the sense of you're just looking at Tennessee, kind of like in the Florida game where you're just looking at them and you go, they're not coming back. Like they don't want to. They neither of these teams wants to, but especially Tennessee, they don't want to just drop back and throw the ball.
Yeah.
They just don't have that this year between Milton and the receivers. I mean, they lost 2 receivers in the draft. Those, part of it is Milton, and part of it is just their receivers are not nearly as good as they were. Like Jalen Hyatt is not out there, man. So I'm gonna take Bama. I'm gonna say 27-17 Alabama. I just think it won't look like last year at all. This is a different game with two different teams. But I think Bama is the better version of essentially what is the same team on both sides. I just think at some key spots, they're just a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is scary similar how similar these teams are. But yeah, man, I think Alabama's going to win 24-17. So almost exactly the same score that you had. But like you said, I think Alabama just does it better. I think Jalen Monroe's a lot better than Joe Milton III right now, which is kind of crazy. If you told me that in the preseason, I'd say you're crazy. Now it's pretty obvious that Jalen Monroe is the top quarterback in this game, and I just think Alabama's defense is going to do enough. And and it's in Tuscaloosa. It's not going to be in Tennessee like it was last year. I trust Alabama more in this game. So 24-17, going to be a low-scoring game. It's not going to be 52-49 like last year when Bryce and Hendon were basically whoever has the ball last was winning that game because they were scoring touchdowns at every single drive. Not going to be like that this year. It's probably going to be an ugly game. Next game they're talking about, though, another 3:30 kick, is Washington State at number 9 Oregon, which is on ABC. And the big storyline, honestly, is how do these teams respond to adversity? Oregon lost to number 7 Washington this past weekend, 36-33, one of the best games of the year, maybe the best game of the year so far this season. The Ducks held a lead in that game with under 2 minutes left, and then Michael Penix Jr. had his Heisman moment. I don't know if you saw the video, Dalton, of Jalen McMillan, who we actually interviewed, if you want to check it out, pff.com, but he was rapping to Jalen McMillan before the game-winning drive, freestyling about how he was going to win the game for Washington right there. I don't think the touchdown throw was his Heisman moment. I think him freestyling before the biggest moment of his life about how he was going to do this, that was his Heisman moment right there. And Jalen McMillan actually tweeted out afterwards because someone tweeted the clip at him and said, please let me know what Penix was doing here. He said, yeah, he was freestyling to me about how we're going to go win this game. And it's like, that's his Heisman moment, man. That's his Heisman moment right there. But obviously, they lost. Oregon lost the game. Washington State got destroyed by Arizona. That game wasn't nearly as close, 44-6, and Washington State was favored by 8 points in that game, and they lost by 38. And it was also Washington State's second straight loss, too. They lost to UCLA the week before as well. So Washington State was 4-0 to start the season. They were number 13 in the AP poll. Now they're out of the top 25, and now they're 4-2 now, Dalton. But ultimately, what is the matchup that you're looking forward to most in this game?
There's a couple of things. First of all, on Penix, is it Aaron Rodgers that's always talking about manifestation and saying what you're going to do and all that stuff? Maybe he's got a little Aaron Rodgers in him, but I don't know I bet Aaron Rodgers doesn't freestyle. But anyway, I'm looking for the bounce back. So it's first of all, I want to give props to Bo Nix. Last week, question heavy what he could do outside of play action. 90 passing grade on non-play action last week against Washington. Props to him. Look, they lost that game because Dan Lading made a couple of questionable decisions. Mm-hmm. And Michael Penix is just special, man. I mean, you lose to a guy like that, and I know it sucks because it's the biggest game of your season and you lost, and now you have to run the table and all that stuff. But you lose to a guy like that, there's no shame in that. That dude makes just special throws. It's crazy. I think Oregon, even despite the loss, the one thing I like with them, they're as consistent a team. I don't know if they're the best team in college football. Probably not. Maybe. It still could be. Maybe run the table and the whole thing. Cool. But they're the most consistent team in college football. You know what you get out of Oregon every week. And you really got it out of them last week outside of just situationals and all of that. The one thing that they need to recover quickly is the secondary, right? Now, you get torn up by Penix and Odunze and Polk and all that. Again, no shame, but it was the one thing I questioned coming in, that they're very sound across the board, but you lose especially a guy like Christian Gonzalez. There's not a guy in Oregon secondary that's like a first-round pick, right? Maybe not even a second-round pick. They just play good football, but they ran into elite talent. Probably Penix and Odunze both going first round, and Polk somewhere in the top 50, if not higher. So you've got a team who's secondary, though. That's the one piece of this who they need to recover, and you got to recover quick, because we've talked before about how Washington State, Cam Ward, Josh Kelly, Lincoln Victor. These guys are dangerous. They're really dangerous. The problem for Washington State, really, for as consistent as Oregon is, all of a sudden Washington State's the most inconsistent team in the country. For the first 4 games, you had about a top 20 offense, right? And they had balance. Cam Ward was making big throws early and late in the play. Their first 4 games, they were over 100 yards rushing in every game. They had everything. They had it going. Ben Arbuckle, the play calling, everything was solid. They had a bye week, and all of a sudden, now you mentioned 2 weeks ago they play UCLA, best defense in the Pac-12, top 5 defense in the country, right? Matchup problem. Washington State's not great in the trenches. UCLA maybe you have at least the best defensive player in the country, best D-line in the country. It caused them a ton of problems. Okay. Yeah. And they lost, I think, by 1 score. Was it by 8? It's 25-17, I think it was.
I believe it was, yeah.
So
respectable, yeah.
I don't have anything against that. UCLA is really good, okay? You come out last week, and Cam Ward, I was lucky enough, actually, I got to work on this game yesterday. And the problem for Cam Ward right now, look, the last 2 weeks, 1 big-time throw, 8 turnover-worthy plays in the last 2 games, okay? You're seeing him, 2 things I see. Late in the play, right? If things break down after his first read, just some rough decision-making. I mean, throwing the ball into traffic, the 2 or 3 fumbles are mixed in there. Just some poor decision-making late in the play that he was not making. You saw him late in the play against Oregon State. He was spectacular. I mean, just moving, throws on the move, scramble drill, the whole bit. Right now, late in the play, he's trying to play this hero ball. And I don't know if there's some carryover from that UCLA game or what, but they're not going to win like that, okay? 2, I'm seeing times when he's hesitant, when his first read is open, and he's just not pulling the trigger. Something's off with Cam Ward. Just the timing, everything about it. He's either not pulling the trigger or he's pulling the trigger into bad spots. And I mean, it's really carrying over. That's the first part that's carrying over. The other thing, too, officially over the last 2 weeks, they only have 47 rushing yards.
Wow.
When in their first 4 games, they had over 100 in every game. So they're getting no balance. They're getting poor decision making. Right now, over the last 2 weeks, 44.3 offensive grade is the worst in college football. They're the worst offense, and they went from legitimately a top 20 offense that was putting up something near 40 points a game, high flying, 3 really good receivers, and all of a sudden the worst offense in college football the last 2 weeks. I mean, it's hard to. I don't know what was said or done or adjusted in the bye week a few weeks ago, or if it's just you put up 17, you get beat by UCLA again. I don't have an issue with that, but Arizona's like not a good defensive team, and their coverage unit especially just took the game over. It was weird to see, and I don't know. I don't know what the fix is other than they need to play a lot better, because they need to have some balance and play a lot better. But right now, it doesn't even look like the same team as they did before the bye week.
No, absolutely not. And I'll tell you what went wrong, Dalton, is that we interviewed Cam Ward on this show during the bye week, and I think there might be a preferred walk-on curse, man. There might be a preferred walk-on curse. Now, for future players who want to come on the show, that probably doesn't exist. We'll see maybe later on, but I don't know, man. Because like you said, it has been a stark difference.
Is that why you didn't want to interview Drew Aller this week?
No, yeah, we had Drew, message us and said, "Hey, can I come on the show?" And we were like, "Absolutely not. Wait until the after." No, he didn't actually do that, but yeah,
I've been fine with it. I've been
good. But Cam Ward, dude, we mentioned it. 88.2 grade in the first 4 games, top 20 in the country for quarterbacks. He also had a 151.2 passer rating on throws 10 plus yards downfield. That was second in the country, man. Last 4 games, and in that Oregon State game too, he had a career high 90.6 grade. So yes, the first 3 games, pretty easy opponents, but I mean, you play Oregon State, number 12 in the country, pretty good defensively, and you have your career high 90.6 grade with 404 yards. I mean, he looked on fire in those first 4 games. Last 2 games, he has a 45.9 grade that is 7th worst among all quarterbacks in the nation, man. There is a big difference. I think you did a great breakdown because I saw it too, man, where he is just putting the ball in harm's way. He is late on throws. He's not trusting his receivers right now. Hopefully he gets it going, man, because we love Cam Ward on the show. Obviously, he's a fantastic kid. He's going to be playing on Sundays eventually, but he's got to get it fixed, man, because you got a really good defense now in Oregon that you're playing against, a really well-coached defense with Dan Lanning, at the helm there. It's going to be tough for Cam Ward, and Oregon's defense has embarrassed some quarterbacks. Not Michael Penix Jr., obviously, but Shedeur Sanders. Remember that Colorado game? They couldn't do anything offensively. If Cam Ward's not careful, it could become kind of like that Colorado game where Oregon is just doing whatever they want to the Cougars. But ultimately, Dalton, what is the final score and who you're going with in this game?
I'm going to give you one more reason why this game is a problem. So we mentioned the offense and Washington State. Before these last 2 weeks, we talked about it a few weeks ago. We kind of liked their defense. Was it like the best defense in the country? No, but we kind of liked it. It was like, okay, there's some pieces here. They're decent on the edge. Safety, they have some things to work with. And all of a sudden, their other problem is they have the worst run defense grade in the Power 5 over the last 2 weeks also. Ooh. If you're going into Eugene with a wicked struggling offense making late throws against a secondary that doesn't have an elite talent but is very fundamentally sound most weeks, and you're walking in with an ice-cold run defense, you have major issues. Mm-hmm. And I try to find reasons. I don't like picking blowouts. It's not fun, and I try to find reasons that every team can win games. But if they don't look drastically better than they looked last week, this is going to look like that Oregon-Colorado game. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I'm going to go 45-17 Oregon. That is actually more than the offense. The part that concerns me is they've just gotten mauled the last 2 weeks up front, and Oregon's an elite running team. I mean, even last week, 214 yards rushing against Washington. Washington did a better job than the 320 they gave up the year before, but 214 is still a big time number in a top 10 game. And to be honest, that's an average day for Oregon. If Washington State's run D looks like it has the last 2 weeks, Oregon's going to rack at least 300 on the ground, and that's the wheelhouse. I mean, and I know, again, I gave Nick's credit for last week dropping back and sprinting out, especially in big situations and throwing the ball. But the bread and butter here for Oregon is on the table, and I fully expect them to take advantage. I'll take the Ducks 45-17.
Yeah, I almost have the same score as you, man. I have 38-17 Oregon in this game. I think Cam Ward will somewhat rebound from that slump, man. But, I mean, Oregon is hungry right now. After that Washington loss, after that devastating, heartbreaking loss, they are hungry. And Dan Lanning, motivates his guys better than almost any coach in the country right now. They're going to come out angry in this game, which I think is not a good sign for Washington State. I didn't know about that run defense part. I feel even more confident about an Oregon blowout victory now because Oregon loves to run the football. They're one of the top running teams in the country right now with Bucky Irving leading the way and all the other running backs they got there too. I just don't see. And with how well coached they are defensively and how much Washington State is struggling offensively, it's going to be tough for me to see Washington State keeping this close. But we're rooting for Cam Ward. We're obviously rooting for him, but it's a tough matchup for him it's a tough bounce back game. This is not a team that you want to bounce back against in Oregon. So Cam Ward, hopefully we're wishing him the best, man. But yeah, I got Oregon in this game 38-17. The next game we're talking about is one of the two night games that we're talking about, which is number 16 Duke at number 4 Florida State, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. Biggest storyline, honestly, Dalton, is will Riley Leonard play? Another quarterback that we interviewed on the show, so if you want to check out that interview, he's a fantastic kid. He unfortunately suffered a high ankle sprain in that loss to Notre Dame 3 weeks ago. Mike Elko, the head coach, recently said that Leonard is, quote, day-to-day with that ankle sprain. So obviously this is a huge game. They're going to do whatever he can to get him on the field. Their backup, Henry Balin IV has played pretty well. 75.1 grade last week in the win over NC State. But ultimately, I don't think Duke has a chance of upsetting Florida State unless Riley Leonard plays in this game. Right now, Riley Leonard is a first-round prospect on PFF's 2024 NFL Draft Big Board. I just don't see the Blue Devils really having a shot in Tallahassee, Dalton, unless they have number 13 back there under center.
I agree, and I think it rolls right into something I want to spotlight that I think with these two teams doesn't get talked about enough. These are two of the elite secondaries in the country. All right, you've got Duke has the highest grade. They're cornerbacks. They're the highest graded group of cornerbacks in the country in coverage, a 91.5. And Florida State is right behind them at fifth with an 89.6. These are two big-time secondaries that you need every bit of the arsenal in the passing game to get through. They're in they're really good in contested situations. Florida State is first in coverage. Duke's in the top 15.
Wow.
And the funny part is you would think, this is going to work both ways too, because they're receivers on each side. All right. I looked at this. I just found it funny in contested situations. You would think Florida State with Coleman and Wilson and even Jaheim Bell are great. You would think they're great in contested catch situations. 59.9 receiving grade is 111th in the country.
Wow.
It seems odd because Coleman at Michigan State was known for that. And we saw him make the one-handed catch last week, right? It seems odd, but they kind of are in a lot of those situations and don't convert a high percentage of them. And Duke, their receivers are even worse at a 57.7 at 115th in the country, even below that. So you've got two teams with excellent secondaries that are tough to crack. And you're going to, they're going to have to scheme some guys open, have some balance. You got Miles Jones for Duke is the number one graded corner in the country right now. Florida State has an excellent crew, Jarion Jones, Renardo Green, guys like that. They both run, because they have these great corners, a ton of man coverage. Duke is the best man coverage team in the country right now, and Florida State is sixth. And they're both only allowing in man coverage about 47% of passes to be completed. And Florida State in man coverage is not giving up a touchdown. So these two teams, I can guarantee you, they're going to line up in man coverage. They're going to trust the matchups, whether Leonard's in there or not. Even with Riley Leonard in there, Florida State's going to line up and they're going to play man-to-man. They're going to jam at the line of scrimmage. And they're gonna try to get Jared Verse just after, especially, look, Leonard's best asset, despite being the first round prospect and all this stuff. The best thing Riley Leonard does is run the football. Take off scrambling. Sometimes there's some read options, some design in there. Even if he plays on a high ankle, which is really bothersome, right? He's got to be able to move in this game because guys, I'm telling you, on both sides, guys are not going to get open real quick, right? This is especially if you want throws down the field, it's going to take a while. And I think similar to this Bama-Tennessee game, I don't know that necessarily the team with more rushing yards will win. I'm real sure of it in that game. But you're going to need to find some balance, right? Like I look at Florida State and I go, if you line up and you drop back and you just throw into the secondary all night, you're going to have a problem, right? I think in the passing game, I think Jaheim Bell could be a big deal. I think Lawrence Tofili could be a big deal. You have to stay away from the outside the numbers against this Duke team, all right? The other thing, Trey Benson, 200 yards against Virginia Tech, but I don't believe he has 80 yards in any other game. They need to get this going. They need some balance because, you've seen when they're at their best, they do have balance. When they were running counter against LSU, when Benson had 200 against Virginia Tech, they gritted their way through the Clemson game without any balance, right? They really gritted their way through the Boston College game, losing the rushing battle. They need some balance in this game. If you get into a situation where you're behind against Duke and you're just dropping back, throwing the ball, their secondary is actually the best part of their team. Now, it goes the same way, the other way for Duke. You don't want to be throwing at these corners either. And Duke doesn't have a ton of speed on the outside. All right. They really, the big thing, I think Riley Leonard's health actually could be an X factor for Duke. If he's healthy enough, and Florida State's going to run a ton of man coverage, and maybe this goes for Jordan Travis too. When you see teams that run a ton of man, your quarterback has opportunities to run the ball, right? They talk about this all the time. Everybody's back is turned. It's one-on-one. It's face guard, and it's all that stuff. The quarterback run game could be massive in this game. But it all starts with finding ways to scheme through these corners for both of these teams. And I know it sounds funny that the focus is on when you have Jordan Travis and Riley Leonard, Coleman, and all this stuff on both teams' offenses. Graham Barton, let's say, up front for Duke, right? Just NFL draft picks left and right. And yet, I think everything is based around these secondaries, scheming things open, right? Quarterbacks taking off running when they have the opportunity, finding balance to maybe, soften things up or, when you're getting out on the edge and, people are running with motion and man coverage. There's so many different things schematically that can happen in this game, but it starts with working around two excellent secondaries.
Yeah, dude, you took the words out of my mouth, man. I think that is exactly what I'm looking at too. Is that my big matchup besides Duke's receivers against Florida State secondary, which I think you did a great breakdown of, is Florida State's receivers against Duke's secondary. Right now, Keon Coleman mentioned how Riley Leonard is a first-round prospect on PFS Big Board. Keon Coleman, top 15 overall prospect on PFS Big Board. He's the number 3 receiver in the NFL draft too, behind Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors from LSU. Johnny Wilson is a second-round prospect on PFF's Big Board right now. Jaheim Bell is one of the top tight ends on PFF's Big Board right now. And Jordan Travis, the guy who leads them all, has a top 20 grade among FBS quarterbacks this year. So this is a deadly passing attack, and I think it's a really interesting point you made in that Keon Coleman at Michigan State, all he did was jump balls, dude. All he did. That's what made him great. And Johnny Wilson is 6'7", 240 pounds. He looks like an NBA small forward out there. And the fact that they're struggling in jump ball situations is alarming almost a little bit because they're not really, Keon Coleman's a pretty good separator, but this is not a team that's just going to beat you by route running. Like Florida State is going to beat you by just going up and getting it because they have the size to do it. And so that's a little alarming that they're not, taking advantage of those contested catch opportunities. You mentioned Duke right now. Their coverage grade leads the country, 93.9 so far this season. That leads the country. You mentioned Miles Jones. Duke also only allowing about 4.3 yards per coverage snap. That is the second fewest in the nation. I think only behind Penn State. And we mentioned before how Penn State, the offenses that they played have been pretty atrocious. So you can make an argument Duke really does have right now the best secondary, or one of the best secondaries at least, in college football. So it's going to be a really interesting game. And I think the quarterback run game, I think, was something I was going to bring up too, is that Jordan Travis is a really good runner of the football. We know this from last year. Riley Leonard is really good. I mean, he basically won that Clemson game himself on his legs. But if Riley Leonard, with that high ankle sprain, even if he plays, if he's not 100%, and if he can't move like he used to be able to, then it could be a long day for Duke's offense. But ultimately, Dalton, who are you rolling with in this ACC ranked game?
I think I like the Seminoles in this game. They're at home, and the questions about Leonard's health, even if he's healthy with a high ankle, it's hard because you're always just one hit from just not being able to move at all. I like Travis at 100% having his mobility. He's a dangerous runner too, and he has been for a long time against all that man coverage. And I think there's going to be times where Duke's secondary is winning the battle, and he has to take off and run. I think both of these teams are going to need balance. I think Travis is going to add more to that than Leonard is, either on the bad ankle or just obviously out. I think it's funny. It's funny you mentioned with Coleman because I heard somebody, I forget who it was earlier in the week, kind of compare him to Brandon Marshall. And I find it fun. I find it funny on the broadcast, that then I just thought of it now, and what him and Wilson remind me of a little bit is when Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey were with the Bears.
Yep.
And it didn't seem like they were ever open, but they should be because they're so darn big, right? Just a weird comparison that I thought of in my head just now. That I was like, yeah, kind of because does Johnny Wilson not seem a little bit like Alshon Jeffrey? He's not the best separator in the world, but he's so big, he's open anyway, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it, the game being in Tallahassee, Jordan Travis, he's just become almost a master of grinding his way through games like this, right? Of just, they were down to LSU. They were struggling with Clemson. They were struggling with Boston College. I think this is another game where I just go, man, you feel like with the adversity Duke's now having with Riley Leonard, and they're not wicked explosive on offense, that Jordan Travis, even if this gets to be a defensive struggle, is going to find his way through it. It's just kind of what he does, and I think his feet actually could be the biggest part of this game. Again, man-to-man coverage. Florida State's having some problems finding balance in a traditional run game. I'd really like to see him get out on the edge on some bootlegs, and then just take off running when he has opportunities. I'll take Florida State 30-22.
Okay. That's fair. I'm going to go with Florida State as well, 27-21. I think this is a great point, is that maybe the winner of this game, you mentioned how the Tennessee-Alabama game will come down to who runs the ball better. The winner of this game might be what quarterback runs the ball better, honestly. With all the man coverage that those defenses play, it could come down to that, and these two quarterbacks are very mobile, and hopefully Leonard has his mobility back after suffering that high ankle sprain 3 weeks ago. But listen, I think if Riley Leonard plays in this game and he's healthy, Duke has a good chance of upsetting Florida State, because I think they do some things that could really challenge the Seminoles, especially with Riley Leonard in the run game. But since his health remains an unknown, I feel pretty good about Florida State in this game, especially if Leonard doesn't play at all. Then I think the Florida State could really blow him out maybe in this game. But it's going to be a great game. I'm really excited for this one. This is actually the last ranked opponent that Florida State currently has on their schedule until probably the ACC championship game. Maybe one of the I think they play Miami and they play Florida as well. Maybe they join the top 25 at that point. But right now, Duke is the last ranked team that Florida State has. So they have everything in front of them right now to make the college football playoff. It's just about not screwing up, really, for the Seminoles. But the last game we're talking about is a couple teams who have screwed up this year. Number 14, Utah, at number 18, USC, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. The storyline, just like it was for the last game we talked about, is will this finally be the week, Dalton, that Cameron Rising suits up? Because he has yet to play in the first 6 games of the season. He actually revealed pretty recently that he didn't just suffer a torn ACL in the Rose Bowl. He suffered a torn ACL, MCL, meniscus, and MPFL, which I'd never even heard of before, in that Rose Bowl loss to Penn State over 9 months ago. And it's pretty interesting because, in our interview with Kyle Whittingham, which you can check out, the Utah head coach, I asked him about Cam Rising. This is in the preseason. I asked him, hey, is he going to be able to go? And he says, hey, I think he's 50-50 for the season opener. Now it's week 8. Now it's not week 1 anymore. This is 7 weeks later, and this guy still hasn't played. Now Whittingham is even talking about the potential of Rising taking a medical red shirt and coming back for his 7th season, where they're in the Big 12 next year. Maybe they can win the Big 12. So he might not play at all this year at all. But listen, last year Utah beat USC twice. They're the only reason why USC was not in the college football playoff. Right now, though, Utah has the 4th worst offensive grade on passing plays this season. So when you're facing Caleb Williams, man, you kind of need Cam Rising back more than ever in this game. And I think that's a pretty big factor, is whether or not Rising will finally be able to go in this game.
Yeah, big time. And actually, to be honest with you, I have to give Utah a lot of credit. I mean, they've beaten some darn good teams. Yeah, they lost to Oregon State, who is just as physical as the ones. They're really the one team in the Pac-12 that's just as physical as they are. Nate Johnson just trying to cobble together a passing game. They run the ball. They play great defense. They play the complementary football. I have to give them a lot of credit with the Rising story being the biggest story of their season, and now he might just sit out the whole way. What they've been able to do, they're not going to win the Pac-12 with their offense, but what they've been able to do anyway with just the rest of their team playing such good complementary football, especially their defense, man, that's just, it's so hard to play defense when your offense isn't good for more than 21. It's so hard. And the fact that they continue, I mean, Iowa, right? Iowa's the same way. It's kind of like that, where you just go, even more credit to them for, are they 5-1 or 6-1, whichever it is right now.
Yeah.
I mean, and even the one loss. I mean, they got caught a couple of times early against Oregon State. It was only 21-7. It is hard to win like that every week, but I got to give them just a ton of credit working through that, because really you look at them without Rising and without Keithy, and you go, well, how do they score, right? And I suppose they're really not scoring, but they're winning anyway, and it's just their defense is just as good as it was last year, if not better, considering the situation. They're in every game, and they're going to be in this one, regardless of. Well, there's plenty of factors that we'll get into here in a second why they're going to be in this one, but They're just dangerous. They're just that team. They're that team that coaches put on tape and they go, oh man, we got to play them this week. Great. Oh boy. Yeah. They're just that team. I don't want to say annoying, but like they just play such good, solid, sound football that they cause anybody problems.
Oh, absolutely. And Dalton, so last week we mentioned we both picked USC, so we're not going to take credit for picking the right team in that Notre Dame game. But what we will take credit for, and something that I tweeted out, was we kind of called this whole Caleb Williams situation, man, and why he's struggling a little bit more than people realize, especially under pressure this year. So do you think that Utah can make him just as uncomfortable as Notre Dame did in this game?
I think they could. I mean, they did it. They beat him twice last year, so they clearly know something the rest of us don't. I'm going to throw some Caleb Williams stuff at you. All
Please.
Right. In total, actually, I'm going to throw this out there first. For weeks, we were griping about the USC defense, right? They had their best game. By the grading, they gave up 48 points, but 5 turnovers, a kick return, all that stuff. By the grading, that was their best game their defense has played against a Power 5 team. Notre Dame still, I don't know if I've ever seen a team with 251 yards of offense score 48 points.
Yeah.
Notre Dame did nothing spectacular on offense. That was, and they only had the ball for 25 minutes. Look, we're just going to say it. Caleb Williams was the reason they lost that game.
Yep.
Right? Over the last 2 weeks, Arizona, Notre Dame, right? 49 passing grade with 6 turnover-worthy plays. Ooh. This year, under pressure, okay, it didn't get any better in the Notre Dame game. You ready for this? 2 big-time throws, all 13 of his turnover-worthy plays, and a 27.1 passing grade, all right? Which there's 116 quarterbacks who've been pressured at least 40 times this year. That is the worst. That is the worst in the country. The worst. In a clean pocket, he's still the 3rd best quarterback in the country. It's Penix, Shedeur, Caleb Williams. He right now, and this is not an exaggeration, is pretty much the worst quarterback in the country under pressure, which makes almost no sense at all. But you see in this Notre Dame game, he's not taking off running as much. I wonder if he's just gassing out, having to run back there so much. The pass protection's starting to crack a little bit. The first 3 weeks of the season, they were 2nd behind Oregon in pass protection. The last 4, they're 50th. They've become a much more average pass protecting team, right? Last week, he was pressured 44% of the time. All right. And the one other thing I noticed on the back end, we talk about the pressure. It's cool. Okay. If you get pressure, you still have to cover somewhat. I found it funny that Notre Dame, and I did not think I would see this at all this year against USC. They played a lot of man coverage last week. And Notre Dame's a great covering team. I go, wow, with all their weapons, that still takes some guts to get back in cover 1, right? Basically, cover 1, put a spy so Williams doesn't go too far and just, let's go. Notre Dame challenged them. And I go, wow, is this like new or is it just a new all this? And I noticed something the last 4 weeks. Arizona State, Colorado plays a lot of cover 1 anyway. Travis Hunter, Deion Sanders, arrogant corner stuff. So all of a sudden, teams are playing. It's 4 weeks in a row with this. Nobody in the country over the last 4 weeks has seen more man coverage than Caleb Williams. And I never, between his feet and the weapons, Rice and Williams and Branch and whatever else, and especially the running, I never thought I would sit here and say, hey, this team's just lining up one-on-one and playing man across the board against Caleb Williams. On paper, that makes no sense at all. It doesn't. But it's working. Yeah, it's working. In that stretch, right? Actually, this entire season against man coverage, a 61.7 passing grade. Everything you think would not work against Caleb Williams is working. And now they're playing. Now you get a Utah team. Okay, they run the 10th highest percentage of cover 1 in the country, man to man. Right, one high behind. Man across the board, and if you want to play a spy because Caleb Williams, cool, right? 4-man rush. I told you last week, don't blitz him. Just sit back and wait for something to happen. He's top 10 in the country in time to throw, top 11 somewhere in there. He's going to hold the ball. He wants to find it, and right now under pressure, he's forcing it. Now you've got a Utah team who plays a bunch of this man coverage. I'd have to look into it, but it's probably something that bothered him last year when they played him too. If they're, because Whittingham, just an excellent defensive coach. I want to highlight another guy too for Utah. How about Jonah Ellis off of the edge?
Yep.
All right, it's not, as a crew, they're not the highest graded pass rush team in the country. I think somewhere in the top 30. This guy, I'll tell you something, fourth best grade in the country, fourth best pass rush win rate in the country, 9 sacks, leads the Power 5. This guy's a problem. He's got multiple sacks in 3 straight weeks. This is a formula on defense. Utah's already beaten him twice last year. A lot of man coverage. And in especially in a 4-man rush situation, come draft time, this Jonah Ellis he's going to start flying up boards. I'm going to tell you something. I don't think he's like the most explosive like you talked about James Pierce, right? Being just this explosive speed to power athlete. Jonah Ellis just knows how to rush the passer. He's got moves. He's got counter moves. I'm going to tell you, he uses his hands as good as any player, any defensive lineman in the country. Just inside, outside, spin move. You talk about hustling, like they talk about like certain guys like the Watt brothers or Aiden Hutchinson, guys like that who hustle late in the play to continue to finish. This dude's a finisher, man. I'm telling you, if they try to block him one-on-one, especially with as kind of mediocre-ish as USC's pass pro has been the last few weeks, they're going to have major issues with Jonah Ellis up front. And I'm telling you, if Caleb Williams if he loses track of him late 5-6 seconds into one of these plays, it was last week or the week before. I think it was last week. He had a strip sack against Cal that really turned the game in Utah's favor. Yeah. He's a problem. I'm telling you, more than any other guy in this Utah defense right now. This dude is a major problem. And if you lose track of him, especially if Caleb Williams is going to hold the ball and he doesn't know where Ellis is at, he's going to have a huge problem because it won't just be throwing the ball into traffic. Now all of a sudden Ellis is just running you down. I mean, you talk about hustle and just late play, just action. This guy makes it happen.
Yeah. Dude, this is the entire breakdown I wanted to go with too, man, because that really is the big story, is just how insane this transition has been for Caleb Williams under pressure. I mean, he literally lost that game for USC. You actually look at the team stats, USC, I think, outgains them in yards. They outgain them in time of possession. I think they average just about the same amount of yards per play. They have way more first downs than Notre Dame does. The only difference is 5 turnovers for USC, and all 5 of them basically gave Notre Dame the ball deep into USC's own territory. That's why Notre Dame was able to put up 48 points. Caleb Williams, that was probably the first time, not only his college career, it might be the first time in his life that he's ever lost a game for a team, because he obviously he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, was his unbelievable quarterback recruit, has been unbelievable through 2.5 years basically so far in his college career. But that was the first time, man, where it was like, wow, there's issues here. And he had 4 turnover-worthy plays against Notre Dame in that game. That was the most in his career. And you mentioned the under pressure stuff. This isn't like a constant theme for Caleb Williams throughout his career. Last year, Caleb Williams had an 85.5 grade under pressure that led all quarterbacks in the country. He was by far the best quarterback in college football when he was under pressure, because even when you get pressure on him, he dances around, somehow breaks out of the pocket, breaks out of sacks, and finds an open man downfield. This year, he's forcing it, man. He's really forcing it. This year, last year in pressure grade, this year he's 135th in the country. There's only 133 FBS teams, by the way, and he's 135th among qualifying quarterbacks. So 28.3 grade under pressure. Last year, 85.5. So Utah, pretty good pass rushing team overall. Top 20 pass rush win rate. You mentioned Jonah Ellis. He was one of my midseason All-Americans on I think the second or third team with how many sacks he has and how great he is as a pass rush win rate and overall as a pass rusher. Jonah Ellis has been unbelievable. This could be an issue for Caleb Williams in this game. Now, Cam Rising's not playing, so I don't know how much Utah's going to be able to score, especially with how good USC's defense looked last week, even with giving up, quote-unquote, 48 points. But ultimately, Dalton, will Utah get yet another victory over USC. And last year, Utah was the only reason why USC didn't make the college football playoff. They beat them in the regular season, then they beat them in the Pac-12 title game when all USC needed to do was win that game to make the college football playoff. If USC loses this game, they're out once again. So will Utah once again kick USC out of the college football playoff?
Is this game at USC?
It is at USC. You still don't know. You told me pre-show that you still don't know who you're picking. Are you still like up in the air?
I think this might be the hardest pick so far this year.
Uh-huh.
And honestly, USC Notre Dame, for as much as we listed off stuff before the game last week, this is hard because Utah still defensively does a lot of things that are going to bother USC. And offense, it's the brand of football they want to play. Man, oh man.
You want me to go first?
This is
you can think about it.
Let me see what you got.
Okay.
I'm telling you, and I know it seems like bad preparation, but this is to me the hardest because I've got one team with such. I mean, the USC is a flawed team, man. I mean, I know this game is going to be close. If this game was in Utah, I'd probably pick Utah. I'm so on the fence. I'm so on it. You know what? I'm just going to do it. If it was, you know what? Every blade of grass is the same, right? I'll take Utah for the fun of it. You know what?
Okay.
I think they do play a similar brand of football to Notre Dame, and they've got. I mean, between Jonah Ellis, everything on this. Look, what we thought it would be is that everything else on this USC team was going to fall apart. And there was one day where Caleb Williams was going to be ordinary, right? Like 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. And the rest of the team would let him down. And it flipped. And this is the problem. You know what? Here's what I'm going to go with. This is not a one-off with Caleb Williams.
No, it's not.
This is like 4 weeks of this. Of just, once they got into Pac-12 play, this hero ball thing, very much like Cam Ward, let's just say, kind of the same thing. This hero ball thing is not working. I'll make the Utah case just to get back on the good side of their Twitter fans. If this game slows down a bit and this plays really at the same pace, it's kind of a similar game as last week. Notre Dame's a little better on offense than Utah because they actually have a starting quarterback. But if it's just, I don't think the formula changes, even with Rising in there. Look, they want to run the ball. They want to play complementary football. They want to play defense. They want to rush the passer, and they want to play a ton of man coverage. Defensively, Utah can absolutely keep themselves in this game. If they find maybe USC's defense, they played on the grades. They played well last week, right? The point total is kind of deceiving. But maybe you've got a team now in a similar style. If Utah can run the ball, they can win this game. Because we saw 6 weeks of not good USC defense, right? And we saw 1 week of deceptively kind of good, but also, the reason I picked USC last week is I'm not the biggest believer in Hartman, and they're not real explosive, right? So it's one of the least explosive teams they've played, and Utah is in the same. I'm gonna take Utah for the fun of it. I'm gonna go. Let's say they find a way to run the ball, and their defense just kind of does the same thing Notre Dame did. Let's say 24-20 Utah, because this is the hardest one of the year. But their defense is going, regardless of the result. Utah's defense has all the same things Notre Dame does to give USC a ton of problems. I don't know if that'll mean 5 turnovers again. I would bet if Utah's going to win, they're going to need at least 3. But the way Williams is throwing the ball under pressure, it's entirely possible. Because last week, look, Williams had been doing this, and last week was just the first week where Notre Dame caught the interceptions, and the other teams they played just didn't. So good luck, bad luck, all that stuff starts to happen. If Utah can run the ball enough, and let's say they get 3 turnovers, win this game. I'll take them 24-20 for the fun of it.
I love it. I'm going with USC in this one only because, we mentioned on last week's show, and we were wrong, honestly. We mentioned what's the minimum USC can score, and we were like 27 probably. Well, they scored 20 against Notre Dame, but also that was, I think, the worst game USC could ever play. It was that game against Notre Dame offensively. I don't know. I still would stick to like 24-27. Like that's probably where I'd say USC's minimum. Utah so far this season, man, they've had 4 games, 4 of their 6 games where they scored 24 or fewer points. 3 of them 20 or fewer. I don't know. Without Rising, Utah's offense has struggled so much. I think USC is going to bounce back and score probably 30 plus, and I just don't think Utah offensively will be able to keep up. So I got 35-24 in this game. I think USC is going to bounce back. They're going to get revenge on Utah. Caleb Williams is going to look better. I do think there's some major issues with USC, but I can't see Utah, especially without Rising, and it looks less and less likely by the week that he's going to play at all this year. I just don't know if they can keep up with Caleb Williams. And I know they scored only 20 points last week. I don't think it's going to happen again, even though Utah's got a great defense. It was in a very hostile environment too at Notre Dame. He's at home now in USC. I got Caleb Williams in this one. I think USC keeps their playoff hopes alive with a 35-24 victory. But that's what we got for our Week 8 preview. Like I said, this is the 5th straight weekend where we have 4 ranked games, which hasn't happened since 2012. So enjoy it. Make sure you park your butt on that couch, man, and watch all these games from noon until midnight. Really, it's gonna be an unbelievable slate of college football. We'll be sending out some tweets from Columbus for the biggest game of the weekend in Penn State, Ohio State, Dalton. But this is gonna be an awesome weekend, and we appreciate you guys watching. And make sure you guys tune in next Monday for our episode. Not sure what we're going to do just yet because obviously we're done with the midseason stuff. Maybe some Heisman talk a little bit, but an unreal Saturday of college football. And we hope you guys enjoy it. So for Dalton Wasserman, for producer Tyler, producer Eli, I'm Max Chadwick, and we'll see you guys next time.